and dying are terrifying experiences that in many cultures are taboo subjects except for the ceremonial parts, and those we look forward to and we are very adept at preparing. But this may be the case because for all of us it is the eventuality that we must face. We do not choose to be born, but we have lifetimes to anticipate our final moments, which generally mean we are ill prepared for our deaths. Dr. Helena Dolny, a life coach, activist, and business executive, draws from her personal life experiences and other life stories to awaken us to the fact that death requires us to plan and to prepare, and to do so through conversations. She has written a book recently published called Before, Forever, After, and she joins me on the show. Dr. Helena Dolny, pleasure to have you with us.
Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Well, this book, very, very interesting story. And frankly, when I went through it, I thought I was going to hear more about death in that morbid sense of the word. And I must say that I got to know a little bit more about you as a person and the pains, experiences you've had of having to lose your loved ones. To what extent did that influence and inform you to embark on this journey of writing the book?
So it wasn't so much the losing of loved ones, it was the alive loved ones.
Yes.
So my daughter had a death that was close to her, and she got very, very upset and said, I'm 29 and I'm a healthy young person, but I want to think more easily about death. And I looked around I had many books on dying because of living with the dying, and I had many books on grieving. I didn't have anything which was for normal human, young, healthy human beings. And Toni Morrison says that if there's a book you want to read and you can't find it, then you must sit down and write. And writing, I love writing. It's a passion, it's a hobby.
Well, it comes across. As much as you're dealing with a difficult subject here, but your book is easy to read and it draws you in and to relate to some of those experiences. But tell me, yeah?
Thank you.
And then that's what got you to do.
Prompted me. That's what prompted me. If I was writing a book for my daughter to feel more easy about death, and I think it's something we lost 2 generations ago, like when my mother was growing up, every year in the classroom at school, there would be children who would die, fellow classmates, or in the community. There weren't antibiotics. So people accepted death as a normal part of living.
Yes.
And also death often happened in the home. So you washed the body, you prepared the body, there was a wake at home, it was normal. And now, although 70% of people say they would like to die at home, actually 70% of people die in hospital. And there's a medicalization of death and an outsourcing of end-of-life care. And so we're losing that touch with our own humanity around the dying and around our acceptance that this is normal.
Well, I suppose it's because it appears to me, I was reflecting on what you say in the book, that the various religions, for instance, tell us how things are going to happen, or therefore your own death you leave to other people and say, well, it's not for me to deal with. The church will decide. The mosque will decide, the synagogue will decide, the community will decide, and therefore it's a somewhat impersonal thing.
Yeah, but what do you leave behind?
Exactly.
Even if the rituals, even if there are religious rituals, and that's an interesting one. If you belong to a formal religion, then there are rituals that are followed, or African tradition has many rituals which people follow. So you're not designing and thinking for yourself, but there are many people who are leaving aside their formal religion, but they still need ritual. And so I think one of the themes in the book is ritual.
Yes.
And what you need to take care of in terms of making sure that you have it in your life.
I just want to touch briefly on the way you went about it, because once you wanted to answer that question and say, if there's no book, you can't find it, then you must write it. And then you invested your time, right? And went to study the whole thing and go through the whole experience and learnings from other people. Just briefly tell me about it. 8 years. trying to find how to manage your afterlife, your death and afterlife. But briefly tell me what happened.
So 8 years whilst I am doing another It's not my full-time work. It doesn't pay my bills. Though the last 2 years I've been half-time on my business and executive coaching. But for me it was a learning journey because I began with a focus on death and very personal. And then I wrote a column in City Press called Let's Talk About Dying. And I started from the point of view of life. So if we know that we will eventually die, what matters to us about the way we live? And the first third of the book is very much about that. It's like, what matters to you? How do you want to spend your time working? How do you want to spend your time in relationships? And if anything untoward were to happen to you, are there any secrets that maybe you would consider disclosing? So the first part of the book is very much about, yes, I know I'm going to die eventually.
Yes.
But in the meantime, how is it that I want to live? And if something were to happen sooner rather than later, would I bring things forward? Like my dad said to me, be careful how you live. When I was young, I didn't have money. When I was old, I didn't have health.
Yes.
So there's a balancing act about how you live, how you dance, how much leisure, how much work, how much family time. So like now I have 3 grandchildren. They are only small people once. And so I don't work full time. I'd rather have less money because I actually want to have those relationships in my life.
Let's go straight into the subject of death, right?
Okay.
That it's a taboo subject, as the Archbishop Tutu says, that this taboo about not talking about dying needs to be challenged, and you agree with him.
I agree with him.
Why is that?
Because I think when people don't talk about it, my observation is that we as human beings love. That is our capacity to love. And we suffer when people die. My observation is that people suffer more when there haven't been conversations. And take my late husband, Joe Slovo. We talked about many things in those 4 years that he had multiple myeloma. We didn't talk about dying. And he, for example, it was 5 days before he died that he actually did his will. And when he had that pen that signed his signature, shaky signature by then, it was as though he was signing his death warrant. And only 4 days did we say, what is it that you want at your funeral? The ANC is going to move in and organize a funeral. What kind of casket do you want? Can you make your wishes explicit? And it was so hard to have those conversations. And what people are telling me is that the earlier you have the conversations, the better. On my website, there's a part called Resources. And there's a podcast that links to a town in America called La Crosse. 95% of people over the age of 18 have living wills. So they're being explicit about what they want in their life, and it's normal. So on the podcast, there's a teenager talking about, yeah, I know what my dad wants. I know when to switch off my mum's machine. And I know exactly which Bruce Springsteen song my dad wants at his funeral. It's become a normal part of talking. And the interesting thing in that community is that end of life is longer than the national average for that kind of socioeconomic group. End of life care costs are 2/3. So people are making well-informed decisions about less invasive medicine, and they're also making decisions about what matters most to them in their lives and being clear about it.
Well, and there are, just highlight a couple of things that you think people should pay attention to. And of course, the book itself is a good resource, right, to understand how to go about those things. The critical things that emerged when you spoke to other people about their own deaths and experiences of loved ones dying.
So one of the things is having your documentation in order, whether it's to, people are grieving and then they're expected to wind up an estate. You're not feeling great yourself, and yet there's a lot of bureaucracy that you have to do. So it's a kindness to those you're going to leave behind to have your documents in order. We have a problem in this country that if you do a living will, it's not legally binding. So I'm hoping that some of the discussion from this book will mean that there'll be a change in law. But the other thing is, we don't think about our readiness well enough. And there's a middle-aged woman in Bedford View in her 40s, and her husband died one afternoon, Saturday afternoon, of a heart attack, unexpectedly. And she thought they were organized and discovered that they weren't. And she wrote down everything meticulously that she did. So I think it's in theme 8, it's called Checklist for Checking Out. But there's a well-known actor who went to hospital for a stent for his heart. It's a day operation. You don't even stay overnight in hospital. And he took it as an easy thing. He didn't tell his 18-year-old or his 20-year-old who were at university studying that he was going in for an operation. He never came home.
Yes.
Something went wrong. But his wife sat there with the cell phone in her hand. She didn't know the PIN number. He was a very thoughtful man, and he had put his funeral wishes on computer and what songs, what his playlist was. She didn't know the password to enter into the computer. So there's quite a lot of meticulous detail about if you're going to be kind and leave things in order behind.
Well, and of course, that will take the stress out of the preparations for your own funeral, for instance, in the case of those who stay behind. But for ourselves, as a day-to-day meditation exercise of sorts, I suppose it compels you to ask yourself questions about the quality of your life, you know, from now until its its end. And as the Archbishop says, this taboo about not talking about dying needs to be challenged. But for more information, and it is an enjoyable book, much as it talks about a difficult subject, there's a lot to learn in this book about relationships, about secrets, respecting choices, rituals, bereavement, and planning. Helena Dolny, and the website is helenadolny.com. Am I correct?
That's right.
Right. So you go to that site, and there you will find more about the book. The book is titled Before, Forever, After. And this is how we come to the end of the show. And from us, good night to you.